I never expected that documenting a basic maintenance issue in my own apartment complex would turn into a police encounter, but that afternoon proved how quickly a normal, practical decision can spiral into something tense and unsettling when the wrong person decides you don't belong in a moment they don't control. I live in a fairly standard apartment complex, the kind where buildings are clean enough to look respectable from a distance, but close inspection reveals years of deferred maintenance, faded paint, uneven pavement, and problems that everyone complains about yet somehow never get fixed. And among all of those issues, the worst one had become the massive pothole near the main entrance of the parking lot. That pothole had existed for months, slowly growing wider and deeper with every rainfall and passing vehicle, until it reached the point where drivers had to swerve dangerously close to parked cars just to avoid damaging their tires, and I had personally witnessed neighbors scrape bumpers, hit the edge to hard, or curse under their breath as they navigated around it. After narrowly missing it myself yet again that day, feeling the jolt of my suspension dip slightly as my tire brushed the crumbling edge, something in me finally snapped, not out of anger, but out of exhaustion from dealing with a problem that management clearly had no urgency to address. Instead of driving away and sending another ignored email, I parked my car, stepped out into the warm afternoon light, and stood for a moment just looking at the pothole, noticing how jagged the asphalt edges were and how broken chunks of pavement were scattered around. It like debris from neglect. I decided the most reasonable thing to do was to record a short video, showing exactly how bad it had become, clearly documenting its size, depth, and location relative to the parking spaces, so there would be no room for denial or dismissal when I sent it to management. I took out my phone and began filming slowly, carefully panning from the surrounding parked cars toward the pothole, while narrating quietly about where it was located and how long it had been there, making sure the camera stayed focused only on the pavement and the hazard itself, because my intention was never to record people, license plates, or apartments, but simply to capture undeniable proof of a problem that could easily cause serious damage or injury. Just as I was adjusting my angle to show how close the pothole was to the main driving lane, a sharp voice cut through the quiet of the parking lot, demanding to know exactly what I thought I was doing. I turned to see a woman standing several feet away, arms crossed tightly against her chest, her posture stiff and confrontational, her expression already hardened with suspicion before I had even said a word. And although I didn't know her personally, I recognized her as someone who lived in one of the nearby buildings and often carried herself as if she were the unofficial authority of the entire complex. I explained calmly that I was filming the pothole so I could send the video to management and hopefully get it fixed, lifting my phone slightly to show her that the camera was pointed directly at the ground, but instead of relaxing, she narrowed her eyes and immediately accused me of recording on private property, as if the parking lot I paid to use had suddenly become off limits to me. When I told her that I lived there and wasn't filming anyone or anything private, she stepped closer and insisted that recording made her uncomfortable, claiming that I could be capturing people's cars or apartments even though the screen clearly showed nothing but damaged pavement. I tried to keep my voice steady as I explained that the pothole had already caused damage and that management had ignored previous complaints, but my attempt at reason only seemed to irritate her further, as if my explanation challenged some internal belief that she had the final say over what was acceptable behavior. She demanded that I stop filming immediately, her tone sharp and authoritative. And when I told her that documenting a maintenance issue where I lived was not illegal, her expression shifted from annoyance to something colder and more resolved. Without another word, she pulled out her phone and told me she was calling the police, a declaration that felt surreal given the circumstances. And for a brief moment I wondered if she was bluffing because the idea of police being summoned over a pothole video seemed absurd. However, when she began dialing and speaking loudly enough for me to hear, describing me as a man filming in the parking lot who was refusing to stop and making her feel unsafe, the situation stopped feeling ridiculous and started feeling heavy with uncertainty. I lowered my phone and stopped recording, not because I believed I had done anything wrong, but because I understood how quickly things can escalate once someone frames you as a threat. And I stood there in the open parking lot feeling exposed as her exaggerated narrative floated through the air. Neighbors passed by at a distance, some slowing down to glance at the scene, others deliberately looking away, and I became painfully aware of how easily public perception can shift when someone speaks with confidence, regardless of whether what they are saying is true. After she ended the call, she stood there watching me closely, almost daring me to react. while the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cracked pavement, and the pothole sat between us like an absurd centerpiece to a conflict that never needed to exist. I said nothing, knowing that silence was safer than arguing, and waited as the sound of approaching sirens eventually grew louder, marking the moment when something simple had officially turned into something serious. When the police arrived, the officers stepped out of their vehicle and approached with neutral expressions. That quickly shifted to confusion as they took in the scene, a quiet parking lot, an irritated woman, and me standing near a damaged section of pavement. She immediately launched into her version of events, claiming that I was filming people without consent and refusing to stop, while emphasizing how unsafe she felt, even as I stood there calmly holding my phone at my side. When the officer asked what I had been filming, I unlocked my phone and showed him the video, which clearly displayed nothing but the pothole and surrounding pavement, and as he watched it for a few seconds, his posture relaxed noticeably. He looked back at her and stated plainly that I was filming the ground, a fact that seemed to undermine her entire argument in an instant. She protested that people shouldn't be allowed to record in the parking lot at all, but the second officer explained patiently that recording visible areas for a legitimate purpose is not illegal, especially when no one is being targeted or harassed, and that documenting a safety hazard does not constitute suspicious behavior. When they confirmed that I lived in the complex, the tension deflated further, and they gently but firmly told her that calling the police over a maintenance concern was not appropriate. As the officers apologized to me for the inconvenience and prepared to leave, she stood there visibly frustrated, arms crossed and face flushed, clearly unhappy that the situation had not played out the way she expected. Once the patrol car drove away, she turned and walked off without another word, her footsteps sharp against the pavement, leaving behind nothing but silence and the pothole that had started it all. I stood there for a moment longer, looking down at the damaged asphalt with a strange mix of relief and disbelief, before finishing the recording and heading back inside. A week later, after that video finally reached the right people, the pothole was patched, the repair rough and imperfect but functional, and every time I drove over that spot afterward, I was reminded of how easily ordinary actions can be misinterpreted when someone feels entitled to control a space. That day taught me that sometimes the most reasonable behavior can be framed as suspicious by someone looking for authority, and that staying calm, factual, and grounded is often the only way to prevent a small, practical action from turning into something far more serious than it ever needed to be.